Sheila here with Sirius Tellus Moon, and we are at the Mars square Jupiter with the Moon conjoining Lilith. I'm really thankful for MDVL mindset. So my two eurekas were one. First of all, doing Adorno's chart, um, inspired I think by a Gen Zer, then basically I discovered that the converted Jews to Protestants. That the Protestants, a lot of them were converted Jews. Now, here is the thing: with Inquisition, a lot of Jews were converted to Christianity, and I guess some of them tried to preserve it within the Protestant, where they wouldn't worship saints. Um, Although there is the tradition of Mekubalim, which is kind of like having a rebbe or a Jewish scholar, the pictures of the rabbis, and they always look like ayatollahs. And so, and regardless of if they're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, and no, you look at Iran. You try to do a rebuttal to Iranian propaganda, then you're like, am I looking at the? Am I looking at the? So definitely that was kind of like, oh, that explains a lot. And so anyway, my second eureka. People have like religious feelings. Don't rape children. So Gen Z religion basically Aztec. And now here's the thing. I'm here trying to remediate corruption with pre and post Epstein list tending to the ritual sacrifices of the elite that caused the entire, and by the way, before Rockefellers, before the Rothschilds. I can't, it's, yeah, like, am I missing something? Is it not true? And the training of the shamans, which is like the indigenous practices, they were basically a form of degradation of the feminine. Um, and then I'm like, trying to think, how do I apply both to the people that came from these practices? And it's kind of like, well, what are they going to be all killed? Are they going to be all imprisoned? Are they like what? How are people going to go to this cultural change? This square was like, oh, Gen Z's religion is basically Aztecs. Now, one of the things that I said was about ritual sacrifice or ritual human sacrifice was the Mayans did it, the Aztec did it, and they all got extinct with maybe like a cooking book left. And then I'm like, okay, now it's interesting because what started the reason the Gen Zers wanted to unalive themselves is children ritual sacrifice by the elite that preceded Rockefeller and preceded the Rothschilds. Think about it. The Rockefellers had to mingle to create, I don't know, global infrastructure, acquire, they needed the agreement of monarchies. How do they get the agreement of monarchy? Well, monarchies like to rape children. Yeah. but I would say, but also older people would marry young girls, child weddings, and then they had to establish kind of like a bigger conglomerate where those up there see the people as sheeple. The closer they get to the up there, they also begin to see the people as sheeple, and the people, and they had to have the agreements of everybody to have like the railway system from China to transport oil. Now, for them, in order to acquire power, to sustain lineage, and so on and so forth, um, but also not to be a sheeple, I guess. I don't know. Now, all of these things created the issues where, on the one hand, if we look at the Bolshevik Revolution, the Tsar was decentralized by, but then was it really decentralization with Lenin and Stalin? And yet the people lived differently, but the missing, what made it not work was because the money was going to the extortion cults in order to try to build, I don't know, railway system from China to Europe through Russia and so on and so forth. And then from China to Europe without Russia. That's how the true dossiers were exposed. 1990s, Kurdistani channel, no, we don't talk about it. USSR fell, yes, we do talk about it. Crimes against humanity, they're true. Now, to the children that were being sacrificed, and with the elite, it would be one child lives, one child dies, and so on and so forth. I have Aries, which is the planet of the elite, going through my ruler of partner and housing. And I'm like, yeah. I'm 42. I'm tending to my inner child because of these things affecting entire communities. And then, I'm trying to, and then basically I see with Gen Zers that go by these, and here when we talk about the ritual sacrifices, basically, or Aztec, is basically about nourishing the body, keeping the body healthy and the soul healthy within the body. And because everything is so doomed, then trying to use sacrifice to prevent extinction of humanity, while in fact it generates extinction of humanity. For example, when I went to, you know, going through ritual abuse makes the people agree to extinct entire humanity. I was talking about the Bill Gates in the other video. So it's birth. It first of all, it's kind of like, oh, that's a big eureka. It's like there's an entire generation is practicing exactly the practices of the elite. And they wanted to unalive themselves previously because of the elite. So, and the previous generation to them, namely boomers, Gen X, millennials, and so on, I mean, that's pretty much the generations, were basically trying to cope with the results of ritual abuse across society. We're trying to, if we think about what happened if the Aztecs were like ruling class, what if they are? What if these practices are? And then the people that said no to that were living their life in a certain way that also Gen Zers with the Great Resignation were. And so everything that was taken out of Gen Zers, all the opportunities, all the things that were no longer, were because of these Aztec practices. Um, and the generations before them basically are the survivors of these practices, which means that since infanthood, most of us, whether we are aware or not, experience whether astral rape in infanthood or physical rape in infanthood. Having to curate our entire life from something that we didn't know we didn't know. Well, without even having euthanasia, which means the ability to say no to these practices. Which, without what does it generate? Well, either abolish ritual abuse or kill entire world all at once without this torture, because we are the generations that were the third generation to where people were tortured, and those that survived had to curate for 3 generations while being tortured. Now the Aztec, not only, how should I say, people say, oh, they want to live life with meaning and purpose. Amazing. That's what we all want. Now, another way to look at it is that the Me Too was only a decade ago, which means that the beginning of understanding of what was occultistic rape and what was it used for is fairly recent. And that means that meanwhile, people would get to the point where there's continuous ritual abuse that just became more apparent and more in the open and less dissociated. This is why Gen Zers don't need to be told about MK Often and MK Ultra, because they're so aware of that. At least people that I ran into. And also this happened following when they would be sent, I don't know, to youth schools or whatnot, then they would basically go through Inquisition. For many people, by previous generations, they were in dissociation from these types of inquisitions. And then the bigger the squares, when we go into our late 30s and 40s, basically we go into a Pluto square, Uranus square, Neptune square. And so people reach their squares and they're like, okay, the maturation of the outer planets are like, well, to abolish inquisition, we need to either have total human extinction or abolition of inquisition. That means no longer practicing ritual abuse. Only then can people have housing. Only then can the soul be in the body. For us, it's not that we didn't know, let's say, to eat healthy food and so on. We spent all our lives doing that and then facing the fact of ritual abuse because we were beginning to recover and they tried to tone us down so that we will never see beyond the matrix that was at stake. And while I say that, I try to really be in open mind and see, well, for example, if Till Swan talked about intergenerational gap between millennials and the boomers, and how millennials perceive the boomers as in their time a person could go and do a job and actually that would yield, they could buy a house and they could, and while the boomers keep saying we worked for that, not even taking into account that we faced their traumas. We had to abolish rape within the workplace. We had to deal with secondary trauma to our parents and their infanthood trauma, which we didn't know. And so I can think about Gen Zers, which is the generation after millennials, that they're probably dealing with the fact that us millennials were already overwhelmed. We decided to retire so that they wouldn't try to recruit us to work where all works were rape. And the only thing valuable was to abolish rape. This is how Peter Ring dropped. This is how the Epstein dossiers dropped. Because it was like, oh, they don't want to work, they don't want to work, they don't want to work. They were talking about Gen Zers, but they were also talking about millennials. So they were like, okay, for work to work, I need zero rape, zero slavery, zero occultistic siphoning, and so on and so forth. And I still need to heal. Do you want the tickling bombing the workplace? Unless you mean like bomb entire art. And I also need my own residence that is safe and free because, no person can house a person that deals with so many traumas. So I can imagine Gen Z dealing with people that are completely dysfunctional. And then practicing the practices that caused this generation to be completely dysfunctional. Now, I guess it's a crisis of meaning, of attempting to find meaning in this life, but it's a crisis where people went to ritual abuse because Gen Zers were like wanting to unalive themselves. Then between that and practicing Aztec is that they have been converted by ritual abuse. Now, I have Uranus in Gemini, in Sagittarius, so if I think like a millennial perspective, we saw that, for example, when a person is suicidal, they would both take care of their health tremendously and try to reach for ways to have like euthanasia. And then I concluded, well, we need to be able to say no to life in order to say yes, which effectively is so. People that had access to euthanasia usually did not end with euthanasia. And so the way I take a look at the Aztecs where they did ritual human sacrifice, which is what caused Gen Z the reason to want to unalive themselves to begin with. This is why I think that they were converted by violence to the religion of the elite that they claim they want to unthrow. And so this is where it would be like trying to eat well and trying to feed the soul and so on, while practicing the very practices that cause humanity to go extinct. The traumas of the Holocaust in many cases were the how death was so prevalent. And for many of us, people with Pluto and Scorpio, we really saw this in various ways. In fact, many of us are secular because of religions being child rapey. Now, if I try to think about the outer planets, so when Pluto was in Sagittarius, we would have Uranus doing its thing in. Actually, the people are having the Uranus square now because that would have been, right, a little bit. No, the Uranus squares 20 years from 2026. That would have been 2006. No, and then we go to the 1990s. So Gen Zers are having their Saturn's returns. Around their Saturn returns, so 1990s we would have Pluto. Basically, 1990s Pluto ingress to Sagittarius. Uranus would be in Aquarius, and Neptune. Um, Neptune would have been Aquarius. It ingressed to Pisces only in. So these people would have Uranus, Neptune co-presence to conjunction. Um, and Uranus sextile Pluto. Right now we're going to Uranus trines Pluto. Uranus Neptune. Helpless rebellion or rebellion out of helplessness, or the helpless or rebellion as salvation, and then the ritual abuse becomes a form of rebellion, which is actually in the elite that does ritual abuse. Um, and Pluto, Sagittarius. Now, it can be that we're talking also about the people with the Pluto at the end of Scorpio, because that would have still been millennials, but if it would be like maybe on the border, because I'm trying to understand why blood. Blood is a Mars thing, it's not a Jupiter thing, and perhaps the Neptune Uranus in Aquarius with a sextile to the end of the Pluto, um, to the end of the Pluto Scorpios. And then um, that could create basically an attempt to rebel by idealizing tradition, which would go all the way to the Aztecs, because that would have been kind of like the Capricorn. But it would have been maybe Uranus at the end of Capricorn go into Aquarius. Um, and this, I guess, was where we would get all the blood sacrifices from, the carpal, but it's also soul and body. Um, so, as per the Pluto Sag, sidereally, the beginning of Sag would still be Scorpio. In fact, the I think it's the tail of the Scorpio to Sag is the galactic center where I have my midheaven. So that would explain why a Pluto in tropical Sag does blood sacrifice for religion. Okay, the overlap of Scorpio, bloodletting, the blood, the physical blood, and the spiritual aspect of blood is also with the overlay of tropical Sagittarius. And that overlay is a religion of blood sacrifice. And like, okay, they're practicing the Rothschilds, they're practicing they're practicing the little hats. um, um, now but here is the thing, they will very likely convert it to that by violence. So if I try to predict what would be the Pluto and Neptune squares for Gen Zers, so we think about Pluto would be squaring from Pisces, which would be 20 years from now. Yeah, there would be four. No, it doesn't make so much sense. No, Pluto would be squaring from the beginning of Pisces, which would be 20 years from now. Yes, because Pluto runs through Scorpio so fast. So these folks would be, wait a second, these folks, upon their Pluto squares, talk about the 1995 6 to 2045 6, 2048 9, these are gonna be, they're gonna be well into their 40s. We're the only one here. The late Pluto Libras and Pluto Scorpios were the only one having, I think, the Pluto squares from like our end of 30s to beginning 40s. And the Neptune square is going to be from Taurus. So the Neptune square will be around the Renaissance. Um, this means that as these people mature into their Rahu maturation, or second part of life, because Neptune square is going to be 15 years from now. So towards their Uranus opposition, which is going to be from Leo, there now here is the thing. If I think Uranus opposition from Leo, Pluto, or Pluto Regulus, and even Pluto Leos and Uranus Cancers, or Uranus Cancers, Uranus Leos, I'm talking about the true seers and the people that they were serving. Now the difference is we have an opposite Pluto, and we have an opposite Pluto and opposite Uranus right now in transit. No, Uranus is in Gemini. So going back, so their Uranus opposition is going to be from Leo, and their Rahus go all around the zodiac. So elected to the guillotine right now. Election is to the guillotine, I believe. Oh my God. People felt like that before the Epstein list. Nobody running for presidency. Nobody. No, there's going to be a set of elections. Me doing the chart of Adorno, and I'm like, I have to be cautious. I don't know who listens. Then like, and it would be considered a Gen Z sacrifice. I mean, now, um, this is where the Neptune squares are gonna be from Taurus, and they're gonna square Uranus. Yeah. So Neptune, אכלתי אותו. Sorry. So the Neptune squares are basically yeah. Me trying to have current planets The Neptune squares are going to be from Taurus. Now, if I think about Neptune in Aries right now, is curating our actions, also curating our food, curating our strategies. It's kind of like the holistically thinking about everything. Or me looking at, oh, I was actually craving healthy food, and then I was basically almost having a bottle of, almost having an oil fast that actually had vitamin D and with essential oils that are relevant for me. And then when I thought it was a mistake, it was actually keeping me from going out in a day where three women were smashed to death. So I'm just looking in the bigger perspectives of the actions and trajectories and how there is a holistic aspect to things that comes to curate something. With Taurus, it's going to be curation around the arts, curation around expression, curation around relations. Now, Neptune Aquarius is curation around architecture or masonry, very simply put. Or if I think about, I have Neptune in Capricorn, so it's curation to the lineages that would pass down the Mekubalim or the saints through basically crucifixion or ritual abuse, rape of infants, and so on and so forth. 444 as I speak. It's associated, I think, with Gabriel. Now, is it that Gen Z is more religious or they just are the converts of the Inquisition? 1111. Yeah. Look at this moon Lilith. Jupiter hour. And I'm recording for less than 40 minutes. It means I began in Jupiter hour. Jupiter 19 degrees. Mars squaring, applying to the square on the minute. And so I think it's also something to keep in mind because we would think, oh, trying to communicate with Gen Z, oh, they are religious. Let's try the religious phrasing. I think that might not get through to them because if they are converts by Inquisition, it would just feel like they have to hide their religion. And Pluto is like having to hide one's own religion until at the Pluto square it would probably be the Pluto square would be from Pisces, where when we had Pluto in Pisces we began to look to go from the enlightenment of the logos, okay, Kantian enlightenment, um, to the romantic era imbued with the enlightenment, where we first began to look at the North Sea and see that that it became a point where people would go to. They would go to the North Sea, and it would be something of, because you think it's one of the most, dangerous seas. And then people looked into the inner of their psyche. For example, when I was looking at scholars like Jung, then I was ritually abused, and I was shown how before the two world wars, they were also trying to curate the psyche and so on and so forth. And the thing is in action, and what do we do? But it was ritually abusive. Now, it's not true, but it's the ritual abuse, it's the rape, it's the occultistic rape that perpetuated these wars. Um, and it's cross cultural. So, Pluto squaring from Pisces would be people trying to look into the depths of their psyches where they would find there the ritual abuse. But they would not know how to name it, and then they can mistake it for human nature. The whole point of ritual abuse was to make people that are mind controlled. Now, even now, most of the people we look at the elite, they were also converted by ritual abuse. They were born into families that ritually abuse the children. It's not an origin of religion. It's not an origin. Um, this is why bloodline is so idealized there. Okay, what do we idolize? Something that is missing. But we could also devalue something that is missing. For example, if something essential is missing, we might think, oh, we don't need that because we are helpless about having that. Um, Now Pluto in Sag comes after Scorpio, which means that us millennials are still trying to transmute what something the Gen Zers gave up transmuting. I hope that this is the case because the only thing to how should I say that? Or that they are thinking of how to transmute that while having to present an Aztec front. Either that or they're simply very, very mind controlled due to extreme trauma of ritual abuse, kind of like the elite. And that can explain how, when there was the big plagues, there were both the younger generation that died and the elite and aristocracy that died. Because they were practicing the same practices. And yet, I don't know to tell of what to do so that the Gen Zers will have, let's say, a way out of these practices. It's probably now the fact that the elite is going through this crisis with Gen Zers can assist to change, let's say, the prison system or the hospital system. But if they keep doing ritual sacrifices within hospitals and within prisons, then it's birthing a an Oppenheimer. And here's the thing. To the elite, I can say, well, people already have certain power. They can use that power. But to the Gen Zers, I don't know what to say, because it's not like they're practicing that because, and they have power because they're practicing that. Um, and our generation already applied for euthanasia. Anything that has rape in it for us is total human extinction, is euthanasia. And you understand that the person that thinks that way is person that it came from experience. So, and the Pluto square I said is going to be from, there's the Pluto square and the Neptune square from Taurus. Um, Neptune squares, if people are around their 30s, is going to be in around a little less than 15 years. So they're going to be in the mid 40s. Um, and Venus, think about Uranus and Venus. Okay, because the last outer planet was Uranus and Venus, and then Aries will ingress with Venus. You want to think about the fact that the woman that supports rape is basically seen as, how should I say that? As that person were like, well, if you don't have euthanasia, then don't, like, okay. And glorification of violence is how Gen Z converted to Aztec-like perceptions. In which case, a total human extinction with A bombs is euthanasia. Because we grew to the aftermath of glorification of violence. Um, so first of all, the people that are going to the Pluto-Neptune squares now are the ones that would drop the bombs as euthanasia due to glorification of violence. So knowing that mindset, I think, is kind of golden information. Um, at the same time, they wouldn't drop any bomb if they abolish ritual abuse, ritual rape, occultistic abuse, occultistic sacrifice. In all religions, practices, traditions, and so on, including indigenous, including Mayans and Aztecs. Secondly, sense of self is not negotiable. Occultistic rape abolishes sense of self. That's why we've been like that, because we did not have the sense of self. Some of us are literally only now incarnating. We see you like if somebody is performing act of occultistic rape and they're not mind controlled, what we see is a privileged person that has a sense of self. Okay? And then like the minute we have sense of self, boom, entire world, euthanasia, drop the bombs, all the bombs together, bomb the concentration camps. So nobody suffers there anymore. Because we are third generations to survivors of concentration camps, and that shit is. We see Nazis in people that practice these practices. We can only understand it through that person was mind controlled, and that's how the Holocaust was created. This type of behavior is what brought Mark Dutroux to kidnap and starve children. We are the survivors of these timelines. Numerous times were to kidnap us, to assassinate us, and so on and so forth. Now, another thing I can think of is the way different generations would see Lilith. This is where seeing Lilith as the woman that would not be subjugated, but also occultistically raped, like the god that was creating the Adam that would try to control her, is a Ghislaine Maxwell. She grew within a certain society where she became Ghislaine Maxwell. Amazing, euthanasia. What her victims would need euthanasia. unless you have some sort of framework where people can, where is abolition of occultistic rape, abolition of rape, and then with actual recovery. What do you think an infant that was raped is supposed to do? Or how do you think it's supposed to function in this world? And we ask, Falcon, wait, you tried to unalive yourselves and you didn't find a way. Let's all find a way together how to do that, and that can be exploding entire A bombs. Because many of us, definitely the Uranus Sag in the 10th or in the 11th or even in the 3rd, have spent decades in these chats, in these forums, writing suicide and then finding who else is in trouble. We are the reason that you folks can apply for euthanasia in Belgium or in Netherlands. And I'm one of the people that were working on and is still working on so that people will be able to fly to euthanasia and to subsidize. Dignitas also does a subsidy. If people through that go to sacrifice the people, better to demonstrate for the release of the person that was in jail for trying to provide self-assisted euthanasia. But if people insist to keep us alive, it can only be in a world where there is life, where there's actually ceasing of occultistic rape, ceasing of human sacrifice. Perhaps this crisis can serve as gnosis because all of these things were forms of degradation of the feminine. Women participating in degradation of the feminine without judging is basically perpetuating this. Again, but Ghislaine Maxwell probably didn't have a choice. But the people that will be her victims would also need euthanasia. So, again, this is Jupiter hour turned into Mars hour. Um, Definitely what I learned here is that the Gen Zers practice the practices of the elite.